If you know the initial state of every particle in the universe and the exact forces acting upon them, the entire future is perfectly predictable. This is Laplacian determinism, the idea of a universe running like flawless, inevitable clockwork. But attempt to apply that rigid mathematical predictability to human biology, and you ignite one of the most intense academic disputes of the 20th century. Evolutionary biologists like Stephen Jay Gould famously accused Richard Dawkins of doing exactly this with genetics. Gould argued that treating genes as absolute dictators traps us in fatalism. His critique rested on the premise that if behavior is genetically programmed, our traits are fully immutable, completely immune to education, culture, or environment. Dawkins, however, is a gene selectionist, which is a completely different analytical framework. He was not suggesting that genes act as remote controls, flawlessly dictating our every move. The debate isn't about biology stripping away free will. It is a strict mathematical search to identify the fundamental base unit of evolutionary adaptation. For over a century, the standard Darwinian model assumed the individual flesh and blood organism was the primary combatant engaged in the struggle for survival. Using the individual as the baseline creates analytical paradoxes. When organisms routinely sacrifice their own survival to protect others in their colony, the math of individual competition completely breaks down. To resolve these paradoxes, we have to reframe the core question. Instead of asking how a trait helps the animal survive, we must ask exactly who or what ultimately reaps the long-term benefit of that adaptation. Asking who benefits demotes the physical animal. It requires a strict division of biology into two distinct roles: the temporary vehicles walking the earth and the underlying replicators they carry inside. Natural selection operates on a strict mathematical requirement. It only functions if there is a biological mechanism capable of copying variations with near-perfect fidelity across vast spans of time. Physical organisms fail this fidelity rule. If an adult stick insect loses a leg to a predator, that physical variation is not passed down. The offspring below emerges with perfectly healthy, normal legs. Because the acquired physical variation is instantly erased in the very next generation, the organism's physical body is an evolutionary dead end. Observe the genetic level. If that insect is exposed to a burst of radiation that alters its DNA sequence, the outcome reverses. That structural alteration is meticulously duplicated. It passes straight down the causal chain into the germ cells, preserving the variation for the next generation. The physical body is merely a highly disposable vehicle, constructed to shield this deeper chemical process. Only the underlying sequence qualifies as a true replicator. The target of natural selection is the code, not the flesh. This diagram outlines the replicator matrix, used to pinpoint exactly what kind of unit nature actually selects. We map candidates along two intersecting axes. Active replicators structurally influence their own probability of being copied. Germline replicators possess the potential for infinite generational replication, unlike temporary biological cells that die with the host. Dawkins named the exact intersection of these traits, the active germline replicator, the optimon. Why can't the entire unique genome of an individual organism act as the optimon? Because of sexual reproduction. The biological process of meiosis forces chromosomes into a chaotic dance, breaking apart and recombining before forming sperm or egg cells. This guarantees that an individual's unique genetic combination is scrambled every single generation. Your exact genome will never be perfectly copied again. Because meiosis systematically shatters the whole, neither the individual nor its unique genome can be the true unit of selection. Only discrete, fractional genetic sequences survive intact. We can test this framework against the biological paradoxes that break the old models, like the highly altruistic, suicidal behavior of soldier ants. The old assumption claimed these ants sacrificed themselves for the good of the species. But group selection is mathematically unstable. Selfish mutations quickly overrun purely altruistic populations. This network graph plots the exact flow of genetic benefit in an ant colony using the optimon framework. A queen passes half of her genes to her offspring, resulting in a 50% shared genetic overlap with any single worker. Because of how males develop from unfertilized eggs in these species, Two female sibling workers share 75% of their genetics with each other. If the queen were the master of the colony, she would produce a strict 1-to-1 ratio of sons to daughters, maximizing her own 50% genetic stake in both. But empirical observation reveals a definitive contradiction. The colony produces a ratio of 3 females for every 1 male. This 3-to-1 ratio perfectly maximizes the survival of the workers' genes. By forcing the colony to produce more sisters, the workers prioritize the 75% genetic overlap they share with each other. The queen is not a ruling monarch. She is a biological reproductive machine, chemically manipulated by sterile workers acting strictly in their own collective genetic interests. Complex colony design proves adaptations do not exist to benefit the individual or the group. They exist strictly to maximize the replication of specific shared genes. If the organism is merely a temporary vehicle built by fractional genes, then the physical boundary of the animal's body is an illusion. This logic establishes Dawkins' concept of the extended phenotype. A gene's influence does not stop at the skin, it projects outward into the surrounding environment. A microscopic sequence of nucleotides alters protein synthesis, shaping nervous system development, which ultimately drives physical, engineering behavior out in the macro world. Consider the beaver. The dam is not a secondary byproduct of a beaver living its life. It is the direct phenotypic effect of a specific gene manipulating environmental matter to maximize its own replication. The same logic applies to a bird's nest. The exact structural weave of the twigs is an outward extension of the genetic code. Genes build architectures of wood and mud using the exact same causal mechanisms they use to build bones and tissue. Once we abstract evolution down to the pure mechanics of replicators, the math escapes genetics entirely. It applies equally to cultural information. Dawkins defined memes as active cultural replicators, ideas, concepts, and beliefs living and competing within the networked environment of human brains. Philosophers like Daniel Dennett noted how this reshapes the concept of mind. Consciousness itself becomes an ecosystem hosting these competing units of information. The relationship is bidirectional. Just as human brains mutate and select which memes survive, successful memes actively rewire the behavior of human networks to ensure they are copied. Which brings us back to the initial academic conflict and Gould's accusation that this framework is rigid genetic determinism. Identifying the ultimate mathematical beneficiary of an adaptation does not mean an organism's daily actions are blindly pre-programmed or immune to the environment. Gene selectionism is a method of accounting, not a declaration of destiny. It simply provides the sharpest analytical lens we have. To decipher the complexity of biology and culture, from suicidal ants to beaver dams to viral ideas, we have to look past the vehicle and ask, which active replicator is benefiting?